Okay, thank you very much for staying on the line. Let's get started with today's webinar. My name is George Benting, and I'm a solutions architect based in the Meraki offices in San Francisco. And today I'm also joined by Tanya, who's helping me organize today's webinar, and we'll be doing some of the questions and answers as we go through today's session. But most importantly, we're also joined by a special guest, Jordan Braa, who's going to be telling us all about his use of Meraki technology at Harrisburg School District. So that's really going to be the highlight of today's session. I'm going to try and make sure that my talking is at the absolute minimum, and we get to hear from Jordan and all the great things he's doing with Meraki. So let's carry on with the slides. So the agenda is a very brief intro and recap for those of you who already know about Meraki, followed by the case study at Harrisburg School District. We're then going to look at a live demonstration where we'll be looking at the Meraki dashboard. That's the cloud management interface for the Meraki technology for Harrisburg, and going through different use cases, looking at examples of how that technology is working in action. We're then going to recap with a little bit of information about the product families available from Meraki. We're also saving a bit of time for question and answers at the very end. Now, this doesn't mean you can't ask questions as we go throughout today's session, so please make sure that you are able to ask those questions in the Q&A panel as we go through the next hour or so, because we're also going to be sort of doing this in a conversational style with the live demonstration. We may be able to show you exactly what you ask for, so do put that in the Q&A panel and we'll see what we can do. So let's have a recap about Cisco Meraki. So Meraki was founded in 2006 as a wireless mesh organization out of research from MIT. Now, at the time, the founders realized two fundamental principles which have gone on to form core philosophies of how we develop products at Meraki. And they were that these products were used by many different people, not just network engineers, but IT people who weren't necessarily so experienced or expert at configuring network architectures, but also consumers, businesses, and many other people. And so from the very beginning, they decided the products needed to be very easy to use. What's the point in having 1,000 features if you are only able to use 1% or 10% of those because they were so complex? So we really aim to make the technology as easy to use as possible, not only to save you time, but so you can get the most out of it. You want to be able to limit the applications students can view. You want to be able to control your classroom. You want to have an efficient operating network where people watching Netflix is not reducing the bandwidth for everyone else. Why should that be complex for you to be able to do? Why do you need a very difficult certification to be able to make your technology work? Well, we want to do away with all of that. The other thing they realized, especially with wireless and especially with wireless mesh, that these devices were all over the place. They were on different floors of a building, in different buildings, in different parts of the city, or even in different parts of the country or other countries. They needed to be very easy to remotely manage. So not only the simplicity of the interface to configure them, but also the remote manageability. And out of this was born cloud managed networking. So all Meraki products from the very beginning have been cloud managed. This is not something we've bolted on as a sort of afterthought when cloud became a cool marketing phrase that we're all used to today. This was from the very beginning a highly scalable, highly distributed software platform for the management and control of all of the Meraki devices. And the founders went on to realize that this was something really interesting, something really powerful, and provided a lot of benefit to people. Why should it only be wireless? And so we released a line of enterprise security devices, unified threat management that provides firewalling, content filtering, traffic shaping, anti-malware, site-to-site and client VPN, all again with that same philosophy of simple, ease of use, and remote manageability, yet with a detailed and rich feature set. Also access and aggregation switching, and one of my personal favorites, the mobile device management. When you have a huge array of devices such as Chromebooks, iOS devices such as iPads, Windows laptops, you really want to have these under control and be able to manage them. And when you can have it all in a single pane of glass interface, this makes your life as an IT team much, much simpler. And so we're going to be looking at that in the demonstration with all of these devices managed from the Meraki cloud infrastructure through one single pane of glass known as the Meraki dashboard. And that's that screenshot you see on the right-hand side, which will come to life in our demonstration very shortly. Now, in December of 2012, Cisco acquired Meraki for $1.2 billion. This was the second largest private acquisition of 2012. It made global news, and this was a very important acquisition both for Meraki and for Cisco. For the Meraki team, it was recognition, a seal of approval from the industry giant in networking that cloud was here to stay. Cloud managed networking was one of the big next things in the industry. And we've been able to now spread the word and go into new markets and other areas thanks to the huge size and power of the Cisco community. And for Cisco, acquisition of Meraki was not just about the technology, it was also about acquiring the sort of innovative development environment, the way we build products at Meraki, and this design philosophy about having very good, powerful products that Cisco are used to producing, but really focusing on allowing everyone to get the most out of it, focusing on that ease of use. And so we're the fastest growing business unit within Cisco, over 100% annual growth with tens of millions of devices connected to the network. And as I said, my personal favorite with the MDM, we're one of the largest deployed MDM platforms in the world with over 8 million devices checked in and managed by our MDM platform in the last 30 days. Really quite astonishing. And this means we're perfectly suited not for just K-12 but all education. Education, in my experience, has some of the most demanding users that I come across. Students, they really are at the cutting edge of use of technology. They have really very little care about the stability of the network. They don't feel like they need to be cautious about downloading something because they're used to just having it. And so having controls, having all that power and functionality, but then you don't have a huge extensive IT team in education. It's generally a few people that need to be multi-skilled. They're not just working on the network, they have to work on other areas as well. They want all that powerful technology that big companies have, but they also want it to be easy to use. And so Meraki is a very good fit for this type of environment. So what are this cloud? So I'm just going to spend maybe another 1 or 2 minutes on this, and that's what are the benefits of the cloud? So we talked at a high level about ease of use and things like that. How does the cloud work? What is it? Well, the cloud is this highly scalable, highly distributed software platform purely for the management and control of the Meraki devices. There is no server, there's no appliance, there's no software to install. You can't run this in your data center or in your rack or in your comms cabinet, which has some huge benefits. So these benefits include no need to buy any physical hardware, no wireless controllers, no limits on the scalability. You can have 1 access point or 10,000 access points, and it's just the same. There's no need to worry about hardware dying or needing a resilient pair. We all manage that for you in the cloud infrastructure. And this is all possible because the devices talk to our cloud purely for management. So often there's a concern regarding the scaling. Do I need a very big WAN connection? Or the security? What about all my user data going into the cloud? Well, you don't need to worry about this because it's just the management and control of the devices that goes through the cloud infrastructure. Your user data, the data plane, and all the client traffic is forwarded, switched, and routed as it would do in a normal network infrastructure, going out of your WAN connection, going out of your switches, and so on. Now, should your connection to the cloud go down, so for example, your WAN connection goes down and the devices can't talk to the Meraki cloud, then you don't need to worry because they will continue to operate using their existing configuration. You can't change the configuration at that particular moment in time, but they do continue to work. When that cloud connection is reestablished, then you can again make changes and they'll report all the logs and all the data that they've collected in terms of analytics on the network back to the cloud infrastructure. And they require a very small amount of data to be able to do this. On average, 1 kilobit per second per Meraki network device. So if you install 100 access points, you should probably allow around 100 kilobits per second of WAN bandwidth for management of these devices. Not very much at all. So these are some real benefits of this type of architecture. Other ones include the ability to add a device in minutes. You just enter the serial number of the device and it will automatically self-configure and add itself to the network. You can have a few access points in your cupboard and you can go and provide additional coverage in a classroom. Maybe you want to provide coverage outside, or there's a remote learning setup that you need to support. It's very simple and straightforward to go and do this. So let's have the last slide before I hand over to Jordan. We talked about the dashboard, so this intuitive centralized management interface. Well, one of the things about this interface is it really is the only way you configure it. It's not this how do I put it? It's not this. It's sort of this is the one you use, but when you want to do something complex, you go to the CLI or you use SSH or you have to use TFTP or FTP or all of these other protocols and technology you're used to when you're configuring a network environment. This is the way you configure your network. There is no CLI. There is no serial port. There's none of the things that you normally need. So it's not one of those things where we've missed out that thing that you really want to configure and you have to fall back to the traditional mechanisms. This is truly the way you manage your network. And we expand this so that, for example, there is a mobile app that allows you to manage access points, switches, security appliances, MDM from your iPhone or your Android phone or your Android tablet or iPad, wherever you are in the world, and includes unique functionality like being able to locate a device on a map by scanning the barcode with your phone, and then that barcode and that device is deployed and GPS tagged with the GPS coordinates from your device. The site-to-site VPN functionality of our security appliance is something which typically I would say is not something you're going to have a lot of in an education environment. You're not going to have that many sites, and if you did, it might be a bit complex having a site-to-site VPN. But the Meraki site-to-site VPN is exceptionally easy, allowing you to configure huge VPN networks, meshed networks with just a couple of clicks. All you have to do is say you want one. You don't need to say how. The cloud works out the how. You just need to say that you want it. And then we're able to provide connectivity for remote learning, teleworkers, or other sites very simply and easily. One of the things that we'll also look at in the demo is the visibility. I haven't yet to come across networking technology which is able to collect such detailed information about the operation of the network. So being able to fingerprint users, determine what type of devices are being used, the applications. And all of this is very exciting when you're looking at the data, but then you've got to ask yourself, why? Why is this useful? What's the point? And the point is you then use this to implement controls. You then understand how your network is operating, and you can make informed decisions about how you implement content filtering, traffic shaping, and other controls which ensures your network operates how you want it to operate. So with that, I feel like I've talked enough, and I'm now going to bring on Jordan to talk to us about Harrisburg School District. Jordan, hopefully you're there and you've been able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I am. Hello.
Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So let's start off by having a little bit of an introduction about the Harrisburg School District. Can you tell us a little bit more about the sort of environment you have there?
Yeah, Harrisburg is one of the fastest growing school districts in South Dakota. We're located just a few miles south of South Dakota's biggest city, Sioux Falls. And in the last 10 to 15 years, we've had our growth has just exploded. In the last 10 years, we've grown from 2 buildings to 8, and in the last 15, we've grown from a single K-12 school building to now, like I said, 8 sites, and next fall we'll be adding another elementary school. We have roughly 4,000 students, 500 faculty and staff, and our core IT team, we're a 5-person team. There's 2 of us who handle the systems and network engineering, and then at each of the buildings we have technology integrationists who handle a lot of the day-to-day tasks in those buildings.
That is really quite a sizable number of students and staff for the team that you have, especially if they're spread over different locations. One of the things I'd be interested to hear is what number of devices do you sort of see per student? So I went to a higher education college recently where they were pretty much at the point where it was 2 to 2.5 on average devices per person in the building. Everyone was going to use a laptop. Plus, they would either have a personal phone or a tablet device of some kind associated with a particular learning task. Do you have any numbers or any idea on the total number of devices that you have across that user base?
Yeah, when we look at all of our IP devices on the network that the district manages, plus the devices that connect to the guest network, both staff and students, we're at roughly 3.5 devices per user.
3.5 devices. That's pretty, that's pretty incredible. And again, I think that reinforces my thinking that education are one of the most highly demanding users of connectivity infrastructure that I happen to work with, which is great because it's really interesting to see people use the technology to its absolute capability. Let's move on to the next slide and talk about this need for data. And I sort of alluded to it in my opening slides, and you've sort of helpfully sort of transitioned us into that conversation by talking about the number of devices. Tell us a bit more about the visibility into the data and how it was before you had your Meraki deployment.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we started using SME real heavily before we had any of the Meraki networking gear.
So could I just stop you there, Jordan, and sort of could you tell us what SME is for those on the call who may not know what you're talking about?
Oh, sure. Systems Manager Enterprise. So we use SME to manage our iPads, our Macs, our Windows devices. The primary focus is on the iPad deployment, managing apps, managing profiles, but we're always expanding that. And we really, my counterpart Eli and I were sitting discussing how difficult it was to get visibility on some of the network issues we were having or trying to isolate issues. And we decided to get some Meraki trial gear, 5 APs, a firewall, and switch. And within 5 minutes of setting those up and testing them and then testing them in production, we saw the value, and we went to our supervisor and said, we have to have this. This will make our life easier. Because if we would be away from the site, we'd have to VPN in to connect to our wireless controller just to troubleshoot, whether an AP was down or not, or if it was just several clients having an issue. Now, we can literally, if we're in the car or out of the office together, we can use the application or the website and find that information out immediately in seconds as opposed to minutes. We also love the analytics that we get into the traffic. Now we know what all the traffic is, whether it's on the WAN or on the LAN. You'll notice in this slide, Google Video and video is a huge part of our WAN usage. We like to give our students a lot of flexibility and our staff, so we don't filter a lot. And with mass customized learning and students having the ability to set their own schedules, we have a lot of teachers who utilize video in their classrooms. So it's important that the network, both the wired and the wireless network, are robust and available for those students and staff to be able to depend on it. And then another reason we had listed was easy to set up, plug and play. This summer, when we did the wireless at the high school, switching to the Meraki MR34 APs, we ripped and replaced 40 APs in roughly 2 hours, so probably an hour and a half. With just two of us doing that, we'd unbox the device and roll it on our phone, plug it in, and within a minute and a half, 2 minutes, it was serving up wireless to the clients.
So you were using the mobile application that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, we can. It gives us the ability to scan in the serial number, place it in the network, and then we could tag the device, which we had already pre-staged. We could tag it with the tags for the high school network and the AP, and as soon as it connected, it'd pull that configuration, and we had almost no downtime for the staff members who were still working in the building.
And how much time do you think that saved you compared to using another type of technology?
Days, easily. Our last wireless deployment, we would usually spend 1 to 2 days. We'd get the APs all, we'd take the unbox, get them configured before we went to put them in, and then spend the time installing those. So I would say it literally saved just 1 to 2 days.
Fantastic. Okay, let's move on and talk about the products you have deployed. It seems like you've gone all in with Meraki in what we normally refer to as full stack. So where you've got one of all the product families managing your network infrastructure. Let's go through them in turn. Let's talk to me about the access points and how you have them configured, and any recommendations you would have for listeners on today's webinar in education as to what they should be looking for and how you would recommend configuring some of the APs.
Sure, absolutely. So with the access points, we're running multiple SSIDs for BYOD one-to-one and our teachers. That's one of the things about Harrisburg that I really enjoy is we have several initiatives going on. So for our BYOD, for example, we have an open network and we're utilizing radius of MAC filtering on the back end. For our one-to-one, we're restricting clients. They have to have the Systems Manager Enterprise client to connect. That way we ensure that we're able to install it on all of our one-to-one laptops and that those are the only devices that can connect. And we also do the same thing for the teachers. And right now we're planning on transitioning our guest Wi-Fi over to a system where the guests can register and then have that account approved so they can gain network access from someone on the IT staff.
And how simple was it to have the MDM integrated with the network?
Very, very simple. I mean, it was literally a couple settings in the SSID settings. We already had the MDM installed on the client, and we went to our SSID and changed, I think, three radio buttons and applied the settings, and we moved all the devices over. It was really easy.
So what's the software compliance that you have set up? What are the rules checking for on the wireless?
Sure. So with our one-to-one in the high school, all of our students have either a MacBook Pro or a MacBook Air, and we do our best to make sure that they run the software they're allowed. Again, we provide them a lot of flexibility, but we have compliance rules set up in Meraki, so the Systems Manager client will check and look for applications. And if we have applications that are on a blacklist, it will actually force those users into a compliance group, and then we restrict their network bandwidth, and we give them a roughly 100 to 200K, and until they're back in compliance, and then they get full access to the network.
Does that do a good job of keeping the users' behavior in line? What's your experience been like?
Yeah, for the most part, it has. We still have some users that we have to track down and maybe deal with disciplined users with the others. But for the most part, once they have that and they have trouble streaming YouTube or getting to some of their websites, they fall into compliance pretty quickly, or they'll come to the help desk and then ask us to help them get into compliance.
Fantastic. So let's move on to the switches. So this is the MS series of Ethernet switches. It says that you're using layer 3 switches for routing. What models of switches do you have, and how do you have them configured?
Sure. Right now we have the MS320, the 48 port with PoE, and we have one at every building. So the buildings that we couldn't fully equip with Meraki, we at least wanted to have a layer 3 switch to A, handle the routing, but B, so we could get the visibility into what's happening on the network and get that data in our dashboard. And at our high school and South Middle School, most of our switching is running on Meraki, again with the MS320. Almost all of our PoE devices are plugged in, or almost all of our devices that require PoE are plugged into PoE switches. We love the MS320s when we have to troubleshoot phones or push out a new config to the phone. We don't have to call the user and say, hey, can you unplug and plug your phone back in? We can turn that port off right from the dashboard, turn it back on. And one feature we actually have utilized really heavily with the MS switches was last Friday. We were troubleshooting some connectivity issues, and the MS switches all have the ability to do cable testing. And we found that of the 48 ports there, roughly 15 of those had a pair, one or two pair that weren't punched down correctly when they were installed, or maybe the ports had been damaged. So that just being able to run that on the switch saved us a lot of time as opposed to testing each one individually.
Fantastic. We've got a question coming in from Tim. Thank you very much for your question, Tim. And I do sort of encourage everyone on the webinar, please, if you've got a question for myself or for Jordan, please fill in the Q&A section and we'd love to be able to go through it. He just wants a little more information about the sort of topology you have in terms of the switches. So he says, so you have a single switch at each location that is using layer 3 and all subsequent switches are pulling from it. Is that correct, or is there some nuances in your configuration?
Well, there are some nuances there. 4 of our buildings at the south part of our district are connected by high-speed fiber backbones. So we're running 10 gig backbones, and those all terminate at our data center. And our north buildings, we run those over leased Ethernet connections that connect back to our south buildings. So we use those layer 3 switches to handle the routing back, and then we also use those to do some throttling and get some visibility into that data.
Fantastic. And we have a question from Zach. Maybe this is one we can save for a little later, but I'll let you know now, Jordan, so you can have a think about it. He's asking if you've crunched any numbers yet and found if you've managed to get any hard cost savings that you can quantify, or is it something which is really all about how much time it's saving you guys and the simplicity in that you can get things configured? So if you know off the top of your head, great. If not, we can sort of talk about that a little later.
Sure. Well, my counterpart is sitting here. I think he has some numbers. I will get those from him later. But what I can tell you now, that one area we've been able to save this year is by putting in one of the MS switches at every building. We haven't had to replace the whole stack in those closets, and we still get that visibility. Now, we definitely want to replace all those switches, but for now we've been able to get all the insight just by replacing that one switch and running the traffic through it. And I'll see if we can get you some actual cost savings by the end of the webinar.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that's something that I've seen other customers do, where they want the visibility, but they don't have the budget at the time to replace all their switches. They can just put the top switch, maybe the aggregation or the top of the stack, as a Meraki switch. And although they don't get the controls or the troubleshooting for the other switches in there, at least they get the visibility, and then they can slowly expand that as budget and finances allow. Let's have a talk about the MX security appliance. Tell me a bit about segregating the different networks. So we've got this business office and the school networks. I'm assuming you don't want the students having access to, say, anything in accounting or something like that.
No, exactly. That's exactly the idea. We have an MX64 that segments that network from the rest, and then we have an MX400 handling all the WAN traffic for the district. So really, they're on their own network, and we have rules set up to allow that traffic internally to the data center. But we're using the MX to make sure that students and outside traffic can't get back into that network for that small number of users.
So we talk about the IDS and IPS, so that's the intrusion detection and prevention service on the MX, which uses the source fire snort technology, which is really quite fantastic. And I've personally managed to catch things, for example, on my parents' network, where they had some software they didn't know about on their computer trying to send data out of the network, which was prevented by the MX. Do you have any stories or examples of the IDS, IPS kicking in on the MX, or is it just something that gives you that increased visibility into the traffic on the network at the moment?
We've had one attack. Yeah, we had one attack on one system that was brought into the network that was actually on an isolated network. So luckily we've seen events. A lot of them weren't serious on our own systems, but we had one system on a guest network that SourceFire picked up, and we were able to notify that user that you want to get your system looked at. But just how easy the dashboard makes it to look through that data and see that data and see what's relevant and what you need to look at immediately. That's been a big time and cost savings for us, just to have that data presented nicely there and in a format that we can quickly act on.
So I have a question coming in from Laramie, who's interested in the number of clients that you're able to get connected to an MR34 wireless access point. What sort of numbers have you seen in your deployment?
Well, on most of the time, with our classrooms, the way they're set up, we'll see roughly 30 clients installed or connected. However, in our commons area, when we're hosting an event, we'll see the connected count. We'll see that upwards of 80 to 100 clients.
Wow.
And then and we apply rules, so we make sure that one or two clients aren't consuming the capacity of that AP.
And we have a follow-on question from Gary, who's interested in whether or not using Apple TVs, and how is this working out with 30 clients connected to one AP?
Sure. Yes, we are. Yeah, we are heavily using the Apple TVs. We try to, when possible, have those hardwired, and the areas where we're using them on the wireless, they're working okay. Same thing with the wired. What we encourage our users to do now, in our deployment this summer, we made sure to focus on getting OS 10.10 installed on all of our Mac clients, and this fall iOS 9 on all of our iOS clients, so that our users could take advantage of the ad hoc connection between the Apple TV and the Apple device. So that's our ideal scenario. But we haven't noticed any issues where we have the Apple TVs connected via Wi-Fi.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for answering that question. Okay, let's move on slides, because I know you're a huge user of the Systems Manager, mobile device management. I really want to make sure we have enough time to talk about that. Talk us through your deployment and your configuration, and again, any recommendations you would have for other educators and IT teams.
Sure, absolutely. SME has been fantastic. Systems Manager has been fantastic for us. This is our third year using it. We made a decision to switch from our previous MDM vendor, and we had invested a lot of time and effort, and it wasn't working. And with SME, we could set up in 15 minutes proof of concept. This is how it's going to work for us, and we went all in with our iPads. We went from my initial deployment with iPads. We went from a
And I think we may have briefly lost Jordan there. Apologies for that. Hopefully he'll be able to dial back in. He is on a telephone, so we will try and get him reconnected and answering your questions. While he's reconnecting, I'm going to go through some of the questions that I have seen come in terms of deploying APs. How would you use access points? Do you want one per classroom, or do you want one that covers a number of classrooms? I think this is quite a common question about high density and also one-to-one deployments. It really depends on a couple of things. So that is how many devices you want to support, what are the types of applications that are going to be running in the classroom, and also what is your physical environment like. So is it, for example, the building has very thin walls which provide no RF attenuation, or are they very thick walls? So if you have, for example, a lot of people all wanting to stream video all at the same time in the class, then you're going to probably need fewer devices connected to an access point. Just because the amount of bandwidth that each user requires is going to be higher. However, if they're all going to be doing sort of tasks in apps or web browsing and so on, then you could have an access point covering multiple classrooms. One of the designs I worked on had one access point per 3 classrooms, because not every classroom was going to be using a device simultaneously. It could be that there's a cart shared between that particular discipline, say science or something like that. So out of those 3 classrooms with a potential audience of 90 students, only 1 or 2 classes would be using devices at the same time. And that's also possible when you don't have a lot of attenuation. So I'm just going to briefly pause the webinar so I can just check with Tanya to see if she can get Jordan back on the line. And I really want Jordan to tell his story rather than me to narrate it for him. So I'll just try and get that sorted, and I'll be back with you shortly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Fantastic.
Sorry, the call's connected, but I seem to have lost the audio, so I'm going to switch over to my computer. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay now.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
So
Thank you.
Perfect. With our iPad deployment, we had gone from roughly a 2.5-week deployment to a 2-day deployment after switching to Systems Manager. It really gave us the flexibility that we needed. And the great thing about the dashboard is, since we have an integrationist in every building, now instead of relying only on IT to manage the iPads and that deployment, we could give them the rights to deploy apps and make changes as needed to, as they need to on the fly without having to go through the process of creating a ticket and working with us. Then we, after having such great success with iOS, we decided to bring our Macs on board, and right now we have roughly 3,000 clients enrolled, and by the end of the school year, it'll probably be closer to 4,000 iPads or devices. We've had great luck this year with being one-to-one at our middle school. We're piloting a 6th grade one-to-one program, and now with iOS 9 being able to have apps assigned directly to the device, and Meraki's quick adoption of that feature, I mean, they have the ultimate flexibility at that school to make those changes. With our Macs, we love the insight that we get. We use geofencing rules so that when the devices go outside of roughly 100-mile range, we'll get an alert. And most of the time, it's no big deal, but we like to have that so we know if we have a device that has potentially been stolen, we can address that sooner than later.
Fantastic. So while we had that brief pause, I have had a number of questions come in. I do really want to get onto the demo, so I'm going to try not to spend too much more time on these. But a question from Joe. He's interested in, how did you sell your plan to management to move to Meraki? How did you get their buy-in in moving the technology? What was important to them versus what was important to you? I really like that question. Thanks, Joe.
Sure, absolutely. Well, one thing I'll bring up now is the amount that we estimate that we've saved is roughly $150,000 with our Meraki deployment. And when we were coming up with that number and the numbers to give to manage to justify purchasing the Meraki hardware, we showed these are the switches or the access points we have. We get little to no visibility into what's happening without purchasing a third-party product. So we went out, we got quotes for our Meraki deployment, and then we also obtained quotes for that software, and we said, here are the numbers. By the time we have the software and a server and continue replacing or installing devices we can get all of this from a single vendor, being Meraki. We have one purchase to make and one single pane of glass, and we get all that information, as opposed to having a controller for the Wi-Fi, a box that manages the switches, and then having to manually configure all those APs, and then we also brought into it our cost between engineering. When we have something like firmware updates, or we need to back up the config on the switches, we schedule. Actually, the dashboard automatically schedules all of our firmware upgrades for our APs, firewalls, and switches. We get the option to change it if we want to, but now we schedule it so it happens overnight during periods of lower usage, and we haven't had a scenario where we've had to go back and make any changes based on those upgrades. So that was how we justified it, was with what our end goal was, the cost to get there with Meraki and the cost versus the competitors. And then we also figured in our time, because ultimately time is money.
Fantastic. Thanks for the very detailed explanation there. Let's move on. And I don't want to spend too much time because I feel like we've already covered a number of these issues. So let's just pick a couple of these to talk through, and then we can get onto the live demo. And maybe you can illustrate some of these points while we look through the dashboard there. Tell me about the Meraki app. How frequently do you use that to manage your network, and is it just something you use when you deploy the APs, or is it something you look at more regularly?
No, we utilize it pretty regularly, if not daily, every other day. I mean, that's usually the first thing we check if we're not in front of our computer. We'll access it on our phone, check the device. We can quickly see if a device is online, offline. We can see the number of clients connected, what the throughput is. So I would say we both utilize it pretty regularly to manage or troubleshoot the network.
Fantastic. Okay, let's move on and let's talk about how it's helped customize learning. So it's all very well having this fancy, shiny IT infrastructure and us geeks, myself included, on the line, very very nice to have all these cool shiny boxes, but at the end of the day, it is to enable like either the business applications or to enhance teachers' ability to run their class, where technology is an enabler, not something that's getting in the way. Tell us a little more about how it's helped you customize learning.
Sure. Well, that's the biggest thing for us is making sure that the network is available to the students to learn. We appreciate that students and staff want to put their personal devices on our network because we hope that means that it's reliable. And with the customized learning, students learn at their own pace, and they help determine how they reach those learning outcomes. So when they're available to meet with the teachers, we have to make sure that our infrastructure will support it, and that they can access all the materials that they need to. And back to the switches, we can prioritize the traffic and make sure that they have the bandwidth and the accessibility that they need. And a lot of it we take care of right at the AP level, rather than sending it across the network only to get blocked at the firewall. And device tracking and management, we can quickly find the devices in Systems Manager and maybe isolate problems in the dashboard, which we can also talk about some more during the demo.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions coming in about sort of how you've configured your APs and how you've placed them. I think that's a perfect time to look at them in the dashboard. So wrapping up on the slide, what's in the future? I love the picture of all your boxes there. It's quite for me as a Merakian, that's quite exciting. But where do you plan to go next?
So we're gonna fill in some gaps where we may have some gaps in the buildings where we already have Meraki deployed. And our plan for the next year to 2 years, or as quickly as we can purchase the Meraki equipment, is to deploy the full stack at all of the sites, to switch over to the Wi-Fi at those sites, to upgrade switching at those sites, and also add MXs at some of our sites that have cable modems, and move our VPNs over, because it's connecting VPN and Meraki is ridiculously easy.
I'm glad you said that. I don't feel like I oversold it when I said it's the simplest VPN that I've ever used.
Not at all.
Okay, fantastic. Let's switch to the live demonstration. So I'm going to fire up my web browser. There's going to be a brief pause, everyone, on my screen while I do that, and we'll go through that. While I'm doing that, let me see if I can find a question that I can hand over to you, Jordan, to go through. Let's have a look here. So there's quite a few questions, one from Tim, one from Glenn, and yeah, a few others as well, about how you've configured your wireless in terms of, do you rely on the automatic channel planning and transmit power functionality for everything? Do you manually tune or tweak some of the settings in some areas? How do you have it configured?
I would say 90–95% of it is configured automatically. We have some areas where a lot of our schools are really close to residential areas. So in some of those areas, or those APs that are on the exterior part of the building, we'll modify the power and try to be a good neighbor, or manually change the channels. But most of our APs, we allow the cloud controller to select the settings for the radios.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and hopefully this page should look familiar to you, Jordan. Are you able to see it?
I am. Yeah.
Fantastic. So let me sort of hand it over to you, as it were. And what would you like to look at first? Conscious of the amount of time that we have, let's start with what you think is probably the most important or the most useful to someone running Meraki in an education situation.
Sure. Since a lot of the questions have been about the network, let's go to the high school network.
Okay. And how do I find that? What's the name that I'm looking for?
It should be called High School Network in the list that you have there.
There we go.
So at a glance, we can see what the application traffic is, what our usage is. Already halfway through the day, we've downloaded almost 270 gig. I guess one of the tools that we use that shows just how heavily our wireless and our network was used is the heat map. So if we could go to the heat map and just show over the last day.
Okay, let's go in here. Okay, and is there a particular floor plan I should load?
Yes, let's do floor 1.
Okay, let's load floor 1 here. Okay, I'll zoom in there, and I'll sort of go back in time. And for those of you who are watching, what I can do is I can go up here and I can pick a day. So in fact, let's pick a day last week. So let's say pick the 10th, so Tuesday last week, and then we can scroll back in time. And I can press play, and yeah, Jordan, talk us through what we're looking at.
Sure. So what we're seeing here are the areas where the devices are used or perhaps used most heavily, and we use this in conjunction with some I don't want to say complaints, but we had some tickets raised where so maybe they weren't getting the coverage or they weren't expecting it, and we use this to figure out, okay, this is where our students are at the beginning of the day. So maybe we need to throttle down certain services, or we need to increase the density of the APs, and we kind of get an idea of our coverage and where our coverage is used most heavily. And as you can see on the left side there, that's where most of our classrooms are.
Okay, and we had a question. Question come in from Shane about the drawings. You do have some very nice drawings. Is it easy to import those into the Meraki dashboard? Tell us a little bit about that.
Very easy. Our biggest complaint with our previous Wi-Fi vendor was it required Java. This does not. We took a blueprint that we had from our architect, which we had readily available because our building was constructed not too long ago. And I took it into Photoshop. I deleted everything surrounding the blueprint, saved it as a PDF, uploaded it, and it's really easy to scale the drawing on Google Maps. And then from there, we just place the APs where they go, and troubleshooting is great now for us. If someone says, I'm in this room, we can quickly find out where that AP is, where the surrounding APs are, and it makes our job a lot easier.
Fantastic. So what should we go have a look at next?
Let's do let's switch over from the high school network to the South Middle School iOS.
Okay, and for those of you who are paying detailed attention to my mouse movements, you saw that I just went up to the network search box. I just typed South. I didn't even press enter, and it immediately found suitable networks that I could select. So very easy to jump between these different sites or different locations. And we've moved from wireless and the whole wireless side of things straight into the Systems Manager MDM platform. So huge fan of that single pane of glass and just one login there. But that's me rambling. Jordan, back to you.
Sure. So, and actually, could you switch to South Middle School Network? I got ahead of myself. I apologize.
Okay.
Okay. So what's great with all of this being integrated, we can and then let's switch over to the switches.
Okay.
There we go. So we can quickly see if a device is connected and if it's enrolled in SME and move right from there. Number 14, there's an iPad there. Could you click on that for me?
This one here.
There we go. Okay, so I'm looking at this. I can see what switch it's connected to with LLDP. I can see it's on a Meraki switch, port 17. And then down at the bottom, it's pulling the information from SME, so I can see the software that's installed. But then on the left side, I can also see that it is in fact enrolled in the South Middle School iOS network. These are the tags that it has, and it happens to be missing 6 applications. So I can get all this data just looking at the device on the network, and I can jump right from this network page by hitting details to the specific information on that device.
So I will do that, Jordan, but what I'd love to do first is just quickly look at the topology page, if that's okay, because I'm a big fan of that. So if we go up the top here, if you have Meraki switches, it can automatically create this topology for you. And what's great about this particular view that we're looking at right here is it's not just Meraki. It's a combination. So we can see we've got these diamonds here, which are not Meraki devices, but we're able to sort of interpret those. This is an HP switch. So I guess this is one of those switches you weren't able to replace. And we've been able to automatically build that topology diagram. No need to have an out-of-date Visio diagram. And if I just clear that filter there, we can see the access points and how they're performing, and the Meraki switches, and we could go and click on those to go into that. So really great that we can have that hybrid approach where you don't just have to have your Meraki devices. We can cope with both and build that diagram for you. So let me go back, and then I'll go to that details page on the MDM, Jordan.
Sure.
So,
and I would like to elaborate on that too a little bit. That's one thing that we have a lot of closets and a lot of switches. Now with being able to utilize LLDP in the dashboard, we can quickly figure out, okay, it's, you know, this AP is connected to this switch. This is where we need to go and look. Where before it'd take us far longer to find that information.
Okay, so let's go and have a look at this details page of Systems Manager, and I can see some questions coming in which we will go and have a look at. So talk us through what we're looking at here.
Sure. So this is one of our 6th grade pilot devices. We can quickly see that they're complying with the security policy, that it's in fact at the school. I can see that the settings and the profiles we pushed are up to date, and then right below it, 6 apps are missing. Which could mean that they're available for the student to install on their own through the Meraki SME app, or perhaps there's an issue with that device and that's why they're not pushing down to it. And then I can wipe it. I can wipe the corporate data with the selected wipe. And if you scroll down towards the bottom, this was the selling point for us switching to SMEs. We can see what the device is doing and what the MDM is doing with the login. So it'll tell us, yes, the app has been pushed, or it's been pushed but the device hasn't responded. Yeah, right there, the activity log and the event log. Where before we felt like we were flying blind. Has the command been sent? Is it not? Is there an error? So that's been huge for us.
Okay, so we have some questions coming in, as I said. Let's go and review some of these. A question from Kristen. Can you demonstrate how you manage VLANs on your switches? Shall we go have a quick look at that?
Sure, absolutely. And I'm gonna let Eli drive this here. Go ahead. Let's see. Some of these here. Go ahead.
So which network?
Let's actually go. Let's go to the high school network right now.
Okay. And
all right. So before we used HP switches, which by default everything their switches come their layer 3 switches will have a default VLAN and everything else is blocked. You have to manually configure all of the VLANs. So since we already had a layer 3 going here, if you go to switch,
okay,
switches, and the high school alt or HS alt switch there. Okay, by default, it passes all the VLANs and does everything. So all you have to do is plug it in. Literally, that's all you do. So once you've plugged it in, everything else, it passes all of the traffic that you need. So you can see we've got phones and access points there lit up in this building, and we have a few other devices. Most, I think, are printers. And so everything else is going to be, like I said, access points and phones. So honestly, there's very little traffic that had to be set up and changed. So you can see we've got 80 there's going on
on a phone, the traffic path. If we go to, let's go to the middle school network again, South Middle School.
Okay, South Middle School. There we go.
And then let's do A, the first one there.
Okay.
MSSSWA. So again, if we the initializing layer 3 features, if you want to go ahead and click that.
Okay. Well, I don't have write privileges to your network, so I can't actually click this button. So if you were logged in as an administrator, you would be able to. But
that's another great thing is that you can't come and backdoor our stuff and change it. So for those of you worried about the NSA and stuff like that, Meraki's not even able to get into our stuff here. So a benefit. With if to initialize that and you want to set up the configuration, basically you click that there and then you add your interface. So if you want it to be the core one and dedicate your VLANs, you can do it right there. By default, it passes all of the traffic natively, so you really don't have to do anything unless you want to. You can then go and you can click on the specific port that you want to, and you can select it and you can configure the VLAN on it. Are you able to go into?
Yeah, so I can click on it, but then I can't go and change the configuration. So we're now looking at port 27 on this switch.
Go back to the switches and then to port, to the ports. Does it give you that option? On the left-hand side there under switch.
Okay, so switch ports, is that what I should navigate to?
Yeah, switch ports.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. So if if you click on one of these, any port, select one. So in here at edit, and this is a cool thing too, is that the RSTP, that's been helpful too because we've had a lot of times where loops are created, and I know that before a lot of devices that had STP going, it would take good 10 minutes by default you plug it in and it feels like 10 minutes before a link light actually shows up because it's doing all the checks. So with this being enabled, it gives us a protection against loops where if you've got a phone, someone plugs a cable into the phone to the wall and then from the phone back into the wall when it's supposed to go into a computer. So but if you look at the bottom here, it says allowed VLANs all. It allows that traffic there for all the other VLANs, whereas others are typically blocked. Now, if you wanted to change that, you can come in here and you can change which VLANs you want. Typically, at this building, we'd use 13, 14, and 19 would be VLANs that we have on top of one. And so if I wanted to only make this available for a phone, and to only make this available for some guest and no access to the native VLAN, that would be I could change that in here. Also the trunk type you can change and a few other things if you want to troubleshoot some stuff with the isolation, or if you want to randomly shut it off on people, that's fun too. So you can do a lot of powerful things in here, which if you tried to do this through a CLI on HP or even a Catalyst switch, that's going to be significant work. I know that there's been a lot of people that have gone to configure a VLAN on a switch, and they get a little scared because of the difficulty that's in there with access lists, and on firewalls you've got NAT and things like that. It becomes very complex really quick.
That's a really detailed insight, and Christian, I hope that answers your question. I do realise we've got to 12 o'clock, which is our scheduled end time for the webinar. I'm happy to keep it running if you're able to stay with us, because I feel like we've got a really good conversation going, and there's still some great questions that I'd like to go through. Do you have a few more minutes to keep going through your dashboard?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, well, let's go and have a quick look here. A couple of questions which I'll just answer rather than us having to go through them in the webinar. Eamon, I see your question. Don't worry, it's just hard for us to demonstrate the subject of noise of rack-mounted hardware. So just to get onto that question, because I see you've submitted that a few times. The switches of, say, for example, the Meraki switches, some of these have dynamic fan capabilities. So they can adjust the speed of the fans to reduce the noise levels so they're not as loud when required. I recommend you contact your Meraki representative to go through which models of switches are going to be appropriate for your needs when it comes to making sure they're not too loud. There's also a question from Jean about enabling two-factor authentication. So you can enable two-factor authentication for logging into the Meraki dashboard, so for controlling Systems Manager as an example. This means you can either get an SMS text to your phone, or you can use, for example, Google Authenticator to calculate a one-time code. This means you can have a secure password and that secondary two-factor authentication, really making sure there's no possibility of, for example, your students breaking in and taking control of the devices or something else happening. As you've seen, the Meraki dashboard is very powerful, so it's very good practice to make sure that's sufficiently secure so no one else is going to be managing your things when you're not doing it. A question from Jacob. Can iOS devices be forced to be managed by Meraki? The answer to that, Jacob, is yes, you can. You can use what's known as Systems Manager Sentry. What this does is when someone joins the wireless network, it checks to see if they're managed by the Meraki MDM. If they're not, it tells them they have to install it or they can't get access to the network. Once they've installed it, they have access, and if they uninstall it, then they lose access again. So that way you can make sure everyone's connected and everyone's being managed by the MDM, and should they try and uninstall it or mess around with it, then they get forced into reinstalling it again. Now, we do have a question from Michael about the packet shaping and traffic shaping capabilities. Would you be able to talk us through that? Maybe we can go have a look at the MX security appliance and some of the traffic shaping and content filtering rules.
Oh, let's go ahead and you can go, if you go to, let's see, firewall.
Okay.
All right. Now we this recently what was it? Well, FortiGuard 600 series base that was issued to us by the state, and with this here, we basically right now are allowing all the traffic coming in for that goes through there. We also have an ASA in as well running the source fire.
Where we're handling a lot of our traffic shaping is actually at the AP level. If you'd switch over to the high school network, we can show you some of the rules that we have there. We choose to do a lot of the traffic shaping there. Figure if we can do it at the switch in the AP level, we might as well do it there rather than have that overhead on the firewall.
Yeah. So, and there's also some savings too there that is we're kind of that big enough where the small business or enterprise stuff is beginning to not quite do it, and to like kind of kick ourselves up into that next level. It's a significant price upgrade to when you start looking at for like our content filter and things like that. So the more that we can have traffic done with our internet speed, we're trying to have that done really more at the AP rather than having to buy tons more internet and buy a bigger box to handle all of that internet. So that's where we've kind of come in to traffic shape from the AP rather than the at the main box.
And that's a really nice configuration there, because you're distributing the load. You've got a few APs, and they all have the capability to do this. So I've seen this type of configuration before where you do a number of rules on the APs, you trim off a lot of the traffic, and then you don't replicate those rules again on the firewall because you've already done them for the wireless clients, and then you can have other rules which maybe are not available on the APs. So you can mix and match to get that very efficient architecture, and like you said, prevent you from having to go and buy that really expensive high-end box because you sort of spread the load about.
Yeah, and the other feature we like, you'll notice this is our guest SSID, is we can shape that traffic based on the SSID. So again, we don't want our guests using up all the resources on that AP, so we offer them a lot less. And the Harrisburg WN would be our production.
Okay, and you have less restrictions on here so that people can go ahead and use all the bandwidth that they want for their particular application.
Yep, we don't have testing windows this week, so for this week we have it unlimited, and if we did, we would just activate some of those rules for mainly video. Is what we throttle.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, let's wrap this up, and we'll just go to the last couple of slides that we have for today's session. Thank you very much for that live demonstration. I really think it's great to be able to not only talk about all the good stuff, but then show all the good stuff. And the Meraki dashboard is certainly much more exciting than looking at a CLI when it comes to talking about how you do all of these things. So what we've been looking at today is a whole suite of Meraki technology. And for those of you who are interested in finding out more, the access point family is called the MR. So, for example, the MR34 is our top-end AC access point. We also have the MX. So this is the security appliance or firewall VPN routing device. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you have an MX400, which is one of our higher-end devices.
That's correct. We do. We have an MX400 handling most of the internet traffic, and then an MX64 handling the business office isolated.
And then we also have the MS series. So this is the switch series, and we looked at the MS320, which is one of our high-end layer 3 switches. And one of the great things there that I see quite commonly used in education, I'm not sure if you're using it in Harrisburg, is the SFP plus ports for the uplinks. So quite a lot of people wanting to have 10 gig fiber or 10 gig uplinks to their switches, or maybe planning for that in the future.
Yes,
oh, sorry, carry on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yes, we utilize those for our 10 gig backbones.
And then finally, the Systems Manager MDM, keeping control of all your mobile devices. I would like to point out that you can start using Systems Manager today. There is no cost to use it for less than 100 devices with all features and functionality. If you want to be able to do a volume purchasing program, that's VPP, app push, especially with the super exciting device license assignment available with iOS 9, then you can start using that today. I've been demoing that recently at an education conference last week in Indianapolis, and everyone was pretty excited to be able to see apps being pushed with no iTunes account required and no one having to sign in or press any buttons. So when you have that all set up, it can be really, really seamless. So we're just going to talk about some of the sort of financial aspects of looking at a Meraki solution. We do have an exclusive K-12 offer, which is currently underway and available until July 1st, 2017, where when you buy a Meraki device, you buy a license for a period of time. And we know that people want to have a long license. They want to have a 5-year license to cover all their future needs and requirements. And this means if we make any new features in the future, any updates, any new content filtering categories, for example, then you'll receive that as part of your deployment. We have this discount available specifically for K-12 education customers, where you can get extra money off your licenses, your deployment, to make sure you can afford the Meraki technology you want to deploy. The other thing that is worth noting is how Cisco and Cisco Meraki relate to E-rate and the E-rate eligibility for the Meraki technology. So as I mentioned, you need to have a hardware device such as an MX or an MR plus a license. The MR, MS, and MX devices are 100% E-rate eligible, along with their licenses. The Advanced Security license for the MX, this is the one that includes the additional content filtering, IDS, and IPS functionality, is only 50% E-rate eligible, and unfortunately, Systems Manager is not an E-rate eligible license purchase. So the final thing that I would suggest is if you're not an existing Meraki customer today, or if you only have one of the product families but you're interested in others, is we do simple, no-risk evaluations of all our products. We will send you the device that you want to look at, we'll pay for the shipping, you can try it out, and if you like it, you can purchase it and keep it deployed where you've already got it configured, or if you don't think it's right for you, you can send it back to us and we will come and collect it and pay the shipping both ways. So there really is no risk in you trying it out and seeing if this is the right fit for you. You saw all the great things within the demonstration and the great stories from the team at Harrisburg. Hopefully these will be able to apply in your environment as well. So we did overrun today's session, but I do feel, and unfortunately I'm losing my voice at this point of the day, that we covered some fantastic content. Again, I want to thank Jordan and his team at Harrisburg for giving us a great insight and a real taste of what it's like to run a Meraki environment in an education setting, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Finally, there'll be one last question about what you thought of today's webinar. Please let us know what you thought, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you'd like even more information, if you like this interactive style, let us know and we'll make sure we produce more of the same content. Thank you once again. Thank you, Jordan, and the rest of the team at Harrisburg, and I wish you a good rest of your day.